Hi folks, how you doing? Today we're gonna see another game played by the great Paul Morphy, and as we will see, although he makes a couple of moves which we will consider not very correct in the opening, Morphy will show in the game, later in the game, in the middle game, that he understands chess much better than his opponents, and that's why he ends up winning. But it's interesting to see that even Morphy could play some not very correct moves in the opening. So this game once again was played in New Orleans in 1848, and his opponent is unknown, at least in my database. So Paul Morphy was white here. He played e4, e5, and now he plays a very strange move, h3. Really not doing almost nothing, just avoiding a future bishop g4 pinning a knight on f3 or something like that, but not really advisable to play like this. This h3 is kind of wasting time. So instead, any other developing piece is very correct. Knight f3, knight c3, or bishop c4, as we saw in a previous game. So any of these moves would be much better to play than this ugly h3, which just wastes time. And here black already can not right away go ahead and win the game, but she certainly hasn't the disadvantage of playing with black so set, because white has wasted his tempo. So he could play something like knight f6, attacking the pawn on e5, or I don't know, maybe bishop c5, or even knight c6, developing a piece, and black would be okay right now. But instead, okay, he played d5, which is much more aggressive, already trying to get the initiative, which is not bad, attacking the pawn in the center. White has to take. Well, defending it doesn't seem that good, because black could simply recapture and still have initiative. So takes, and now black plays a very logical move, bishop c5. Instead of recapturing the pawn right away, he just develops a piece, because that pawn is not going to go anyway right now, and recapturing it right away wouldn't be that great, because this is a rule that is almost always important to follow, not to develop the queen too early, because the opponent can erase it from the center of the board, developing some light pieces like the knight on c3, attacking the queen, and the queen will have to lose some tempos to get away. So white will catch up in development and recover the tempo he has lost with h3, for instance, in this game. So okay, although there is an opening where e4, d5, the queen takes on d5 right away, the Scandinavian defense, but usually this is not a great idea to develop the queen so early. Instead, something like knight f6, which would have been also interesting, developing a knight and aiming to recapture there, maybe with the knight, not to have to face the knight c3 chasing the queen. And black could even go with this sacrificing pawn sac line, bishop b5 check. Now c6 is interesting, because if pawn takes, the pawn is protected by the knight. The bishop has to go back, and now black develops yet another move. He's ready to castle. He's got a pawn in the center, he's got this bishop, he's got the knight, and he's going to castle in the next move. So he has, we could say he has enough compensation from the pawn. So that means that even though he's material down, his activity, his development is compensating that. Only thing white has is this bishop on a4, which is not that great. It's a developed piece, but right now not that great as this bishop, for instance. And he also got this ugly looking pawn on h3, which is doing basically nothing. But okay, instead, as we saw, black went with bishop c5, also a good move. Now bishop c4, developing a piece, and well, so for the time being protecting that pawn, but as we will see, white is not going to stick up to this pawn forever, because he has to develop, and Paul Morphy knows that, although he played this odd move, h3. c6, okay, if white takes right away, as we saw, black is sacrificing a pawn, but getting development in exchange. So he will have developed the knight on c6, the bishop on c5. He's got a pawn on the center, and once again black has enough compensation for the pawn. Well, Morphy knows that you don't have to take all the pawns you can in the opening, but instead you have to develop. So knight c3, just attacking, defending this pawn once again, although he's not going to defend it forever, but it's the developing move, a good one. Knight f6, here d3, an okay move, just getting ready to develop this bishop, protecting central squares. Would now be also correct to play knight f3, another developing move, just attacking the pawn and getting ready to castle. But instead the d3 was played, which is not bad either. Now a5, not that great move. It's not developing a piece, it's just moving a pawn on the edge of the board, although it has a trick, an idea, to try to trap this bishop with moves like b5, bishop b3 and a4, but it loses a little bit of tempo. Probably would have been better to play something like castling, or don't know, maybe just recapture this pawn on the center, but a5 certainly doesn't look that great. Now white just ignores that threat of b5 and a4 trapping the bishop and develops the bishop on c1 to g5, pinning the knight on f6, that the knight cannot be moved without losing the queen. Instead, he could have already taken the sacrifice, the pawn sacrifice black is offering, on c6. The knight takes on c6 and knight f3. Now the b5 square is protected. Now there is no tricks with b5 and trapping the bishop. Either the knight or the bishop could take it. And overall, okay, black has both white and black have more or less enough development. But okay, if we take into account that white is a pawn up, but instead he has played this ugly move h3, this is roughly equal game. Black is up on material, but he has played a strange looking move, and black took that time, that tempo, to catch up in development. Instead, well, Morphy went with this bishop g5. Now black could have played this b5 line. This was not played, but this was interesting. b5 is more or less forcing. Well, bishop b3 is just losing to a4. Now there is no compensation for the piece. White is going to either take the pawn and be recaptured with the pawn, or wait until black takes the bishop. But instead, white could try some tricks, like knight e4. Now the bishop is going to be lost. So now white is trying to do something to counterattack black. Now this knight is very well situated here. It's attacking the knight on f6, which, remember, it cannot move. It is pinned. The queen would be lost if the knight moves. So and the knight is attacking. Oops, sorry, didn't mean that. The knight is attacking the bishop on c5 as well. Oops, here we are. The knight is attacking this bishop. So if black takes on c4, white will take on c5, get the bishop, and probably be okay. But instead, if black, say, goes to d6, logical move, getting away from the attack and still threatening to take the bishop, white keeps developing pieces and attacking the weakness that black has now, which is this pin right now. The knight on f6 is weak because it is attacked by two pieces, but it is pinned to the queen. Now queen f3 is putting more fire here. Now the knight is attacked by three pieces and is only defended by two. And if black goes ahead to defend it, well, white will recapture capture the pawn on c6, attack the knight on d7. Let's take a look at that. So it is white who is attacking here, although black is attacking here as well. So anyway, it is clear that white got lots of activity. Instead of losing the bishop right away, now he could also try something like knight d6 check, because the queen is not protecting d6 anymore. So lots of activity here for white, although he should be careful as well. But instead, if bishop b6, now queen f3. If black takes on c4, now there are 3 pieces as we saw attacking f6, only 2 defending it, the queen and the pawn, and white will take on f6 with check, and here the bishop is attacking both the queen and the rook. Now the queen must get away if it doesn't want to get lost. Probably will take on d5. Now it's protected with the pawn on c6. White would take on h8. Now white has taken a pawn and the rook, and black has a bishop. So probably white must be much better here. So as we saw, even though it seems white was going to lose a piece here on c4, if the opponent has enough weaknesses and you are fast enough to develop pieces and counterattack, there might be lots of tricks and lots of tactics going on. But anyway, this did not happen, because after bishop g5, black went on to defend this knight with knight bd7. Not bad, because it's developing a piece, but well, there were lots of interesting other interesting lines after b5. Sorry. Now the knight is defending the pawn on e5, then they're giving support to the knight on f6. Here, something like knight f3 once again would be correct, just developing the last piece. But instead, Paul Morphy went on to take finally that pawn on c6. Now b takes, and now he plays knight f3. Now once again, as we saw in other variations, white is up a pawn. But now black doesn't have that great development, because the bishop is right now blocked, and there is a nasty pin here, which is not very comfortable. Now, and although white has played this once again, this bizarre h3 move, probably black hasn't enough compensation, because he hasn't developed that great, and these pawns here are a little bit strangely situated. These are more or less weak pawns for the future, because they cannot be protected with other pawns, they're isolated. Here black castled, and white did a castle as well. h6, trying to get rid of the pin. Bishop h4, still pinning. Now typical bad move here, which some beginner players would be to play g5, because the pin is very irritating and then they want to get away with it. But the problem is that after bishop g3, the king side is very weak. There are lots of weak squares here. The pawns are far too advanced, which means they are weak in this case, because they cannot be protected by other pawns. They are leaving some squares unprotected, and black must definitely be very careful in this kind of position, because if white gets through and even sacrificing some pieces, he could have easily a mating attack. So it is much more accurate to play queen c7, just getting the queen on a better diagonal, getting out of the pin, protecting the e5 pawn. Now Morphy plays an interesting move, d4, just trying to open up the center, attacking the bishop on c5. Something like bishop g3 I think is also interesting, pinning once again the queen, and now that the bishop wasn't pinning the queen on this diagonal, he goes here. Now this pawn cannot move without losing the queen. But okay, d4 is interesting as well. E takes and knight takes. Here black played not really very normal move. Bishop d6, well, it attacks the h2 square, but it's just a check. White could go with the king to h1, and it seems that nothing much is going on. It's kind of developing move, because he's moving the bishop twice in the opening. Now it would be sorry, that's too fast. It would be much interesting to play a move like queen f4, which is very interesting. It is attacking the bishop on h4. It is attacking the knight on d4, and it is attacking indirectly the bishop on c4, because this knight, now if it moves, the bishop on c4 could be taken with the queen. Now white has 2 pieces under attack, so he has to exchange the bishop on f6, not to lose the bishop, and then Now he can't move this knight because as we saw, the bishop would be lost. So knight ce2, protecting the knight twice and attacking the queen. And well, it seems the black queen will have to go back, but he will have time to develop this other bishop and have a more or less comfortable game. Instead, bishop d6 doesn't do that much and, well, seems suspicious. Here white played quite energetically. Knight f5, attacking the bishop with two pieces, with the queen and the knight. Bishop h2 check, but now king h1, and suddenly white is threatening to block, to trap this bishop with something like g3, because if bishop recaptures, the bishop could take on g3, and that's a piece that black could lose. So knight e5, attacking the bishop and trying to create some activity here. Although at this point white must be much better already, because this bishop and this queen aren't looking that good. There is not much coordination, and bishop on c8 is not playing. So bishop b3, and now bishop a6, developing the bishop on a6, attacking the rook, connecting his own rooks, but unfortunately there are a couple of strangely placed pieces black has here, and as we will see, that will cause him lots of problem here. Rook e1, just attacking the knight on e5 and getting out of the attack. Now knight g6 is definitely a big mistake, because this allows a typical attack on the king side. Now the bishop takes on f6, only move, g takes, and after queen h5, black just resigned, because there are too many threats to get into the king side and checkmate black in a couple of moves. Now there are two ways to checkmate here white. White's idea are to take on h6 and then checkmate on g7, or even more beautiful, to take on g6 as the pawn on f7 is pinned and could not recapture, and checkmate black on g7 once again. Now if he tries to, say, prevent white from taking on h6, as we saw, queen takes g6. Now white, the pawn cannot recapture, cannot take the queen because it would be check. So only move king h8 and queen g7 checkmate. And as I said, after queen h5, black already resigned. Fairly short game, only 19 moves, in which we saw that even Paul Morphy can play some odd moves in the opening, that h3 wasn't good at all, but later he understands that development is important, and he, in the proper moment, he gets on a decisive attack on the king side, seeing that taking on f6 and going with the queen to h5, there is no way to stop white from checkmating the black king. That was all for today. Thanks for watching.